When you look at the oldest and most intact spiritualities around the world, you will find that at the center of their practice is ancestral veneration. For many of us who are raised in less intact spiritualities and in cultures with a tendency to mold prevalent religions to the will of empire, venerating our ancestors can feel complicated, to say the least. The same cultures that tend to mold religions to the will of empire also have a habit of tainting our ancestral line. It doesn't take long tracing back the family trees of many of us to run into the stains and wounds of colonialism, racism, and patriarchy. I think for many of us in this situation, not interested in inviting these influences into our spiritual lives, it's easy to feel like ancestor veneration just isn't for us. Aidan Wachter is one of my favorite thinkers on the subject of sitting with the trouble of working with ancestors and the actionable techniques they've developed to productively navigate these practices are unrivaled. On top of offering unique methods to heal and remediate more negative aspects of our ancestral lines, Aidan also has a very interesting solution for those of us who might face this spiritual conundrum in our own practice. Aidan has a name for the ancestors that come to us from the deep, distant past, and whose insights and motivations seem to bypass much of the taint of empire. Aidan calls them the old lines, and they are regularly explored on his invaluable Patreon platform, as well as the focus of his upcoming book, Spirit in Stone, Animism and the Old Lines. In our chat today, Aidan and I go deep into the old lines, considering how this kind of ancestor work is unique from what we typically encounter when exploring the subject, and also how we might begin working with spirits from the old line that have no ancestral ties to us. Speaking of invaluable Patreon platforms, I probably don't plug mine enough, but to hear my extended conversation with Aidan, you can find it in many other additional bonus interviews on our Radical LFAM Patreon page. In my bonus chat with Aidan, we dive into a fascinating new area of focus for them that they're still exploring and unraveling. I can't recommend it enough. And while I'm at it, I'd love to shout out all the folks who've been gracious enough to support us over on Patreon. Irina, Juliet, Richard, Daniel, Patrick, Brandy, Sam, Oliver, and Motek. I can't thank you all enough for the support. Now, on with the show. Aidan Wachter, welcome back to Radical LFAM. It is a pleasure to have you here again.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Awesome. Yeah, well, we had you on last year, I believe, and a lot's happened since then. Your Patreon's really grown and started thriving, and I'm lucky to be a part of it. And I saw that you recently released at least a working title for your next book, which is very exciting, which is Spirit in Stone, Animism and the Old Lines.
Yes.
And I do have some questions about that. But to kind of kick things off, your last book, Changeling, which was one of my favorites, came out 4 years ago. You have a new book coming out next year. I'm curious, what has changed the most about your practice in that interim?
This is one of those questions that Chad gets to ask because he's been hanging around and he actually knows some of the answers with and knows that he's like, let's go really juicy from the start. But Changeling was like, retrospectively, because that's all I got now, right? It was the book that needed to be written in the moment, but these things are very much working magical things when I do them. And at the time, the conversation that I was kind of having with my allies is they were like, you're doing this book about witchcraft. And I'm like, but my take on witchcraft is kind of fucked up and it will just piss people off. And they were like, so what? It's good. Do it. And I did. And what it kind of turned into was, as you know, because you've been in it, is it's kind of like an interrogation about what makes you you from the perspective of somebody who might consider themselves a witch or similar kind of magical practitioner. Not this is the theoretical basis for all this, but like what's going on inside of you that might allow your life to work better if this is the way you're operating. And that's really what the qualities are kind of talking to, is like, these are things you might look at and see where you sit with them. You know, they're not prescriptive. It's just like, this is a thing that's relevant. And the end result of that book for me in doing that working process myself was I blew up my life. There was a very big chunk of my life that was really not in congruence with what I actually wanted from a life. And I had a pretty major breakdown. And coming out of that, and I think we may have talked about this the last time we talked, but I went really to the land where I was and asked for help, and the spirits there, because I was just totally lost. I was pretty sure I'd gone insane, or at least it was a possibility, you know? And they basically walked me out of that. And that process, you know, started in the woods of Bellingham, Washington, basically. And they got me completely, you know, out of the weeds, realized, no, I'm just in a really bad situation. And I've been doing the kind of mental gymnastics we can do to keep ourselves in situations that we shouldn't. And that kind of incongruence or incoherence between what I knew was correct and what I was actually doing was just massive, massive friction, right? And so changed a whole bunch of shit. Changed pretty much everything. And really just spent that next, I guess, 2 years after that kind of initial click, just walking in the woods and talking to them, and then in trance work a lot, in trance spaces a lot, talking to my allies. And what happened was that they came in much, much stronger and much, much clearer than they ever had. Like they would come in sometimes really clear, and I always felt I could like feel their direction, but it was, you know, it was more subtle. And this time they were much louder. And so how do I even describe that shift? So one way to look at the books is like Six Ways was like the first maybe 30 years of my magical practice. And these were like key pieces that I thought were pretty universally useful to people. And so that was like very much like this. These are just like good starting pieces that if you can find a couple of them that will work for you, it's enough to build from. You don't need as much as most people think you need, I don't believe. And then Weaving Fate, kind of the allies in the form of X, came in and said, this is a practice that you've been doing for a long time, but let us help you talk about it. Because I was like, how do you really talk about this and not have it be totally vague, right? Or totally prescriptive. And so that whole chunk on the Black Book, which is kind of an interrogation of like me kind of adding commentary on X's own Black Book explorations, came about that way. And so she was very present to me as if she was a person that I was engaging with through all of that. And so that was kind of where the first two were. And then I've talked about what Changeling was. And what has happened is that I realized that, well, I have all of these tools, and in many ways they helped me develop other skills and other abilities, which is kind of what they're for. That where I'm actually at now is direct kind of spirit contact. Like it's not ritualized. It's just there. And as I've proceeded since the kind of breakdown, that's become clearer and clearer. And I've been able to develop kind of systems for having those conversations for someone who's not, I'm not clairvoyant, I'm not clairaudient. I have some clairsentience, right, or claircognizance. But it's like I run kind of on this gut knowing, and then this experience of kind of having information that I didn't have a second ago. But that was always a little sporadic. And post that kind of breakdown, and post really, I think, going and straight up to the spirits and going like, I don't know my way out of this. Help me out. That was an open enough invitation, or I had changed enough through that process that they were like, okay, we can work this all out with you. Pardon me. And so, yeah, that's the main thing that's changed, is it's now very direct. And that's kind of one of the things that I've shared a little bit in a few spaces, so that you've probably run across, is that previously to like up through Changeling and publishing that, I would have said that I'm a magical practitioner who is an animist. And now I would say that I'm an animist who framework for talking about it is magic, because that's what my background is.
That's really interesting. So I haven't actually read this new book yet. I'm excited to when it comes out, but I'm curious, from what you just kind of laid out there, is part of the new book in some ways taking somebody who's been reading your work up until this point and also giving them tools to maybe tap into that kind of clear communication themselves?
So practically, I don't know how to do that for anybody.
Yeah.
This is partially what I try and do through everything that I do is, and you've seen, I'm sure, seen the shift through the Patreon stuff and all that. That I'm still like, I'll teach technique and stuff, but from my experience, there's not technique that works for everybody. And the thing that I have found for myself and a lot of us that are kind of, our own view might be that we're kind of deficient on the psychic skills, or like me, aphantasic, no inner screen. It's mostly not about tech. It's about subtlety. Like, can you fucking ease up like all of our kind of drives to like get this stuff so much that you can actually figure out where the communication is coming through? Because I'm firmly in the camp that believe that we all have allies and that they're all doing their best for us, which we may and very frequently are working against. So it's not like you got to do something to get them, but you might have to do a lot to figure out that they're there and that they're trying to work with you, and accept that how that shows up might be really fucking different from person to person. And so, the Spirit in Stone is, it's basically there's two primary components to it. There's the spirit side and the stones, right? And the spirit side is basically kind of sharing where I've got to in my thinking about animism. So this is not, there's like no references to academics. There's no references to other systems, really. I think Lee Morgan probably gets a quote or two in there, but it's not comparative. It's not historical. It's not any of that. It's just like, this is the shit that has ended up happening 40 something years in for me. But trying to be written in a way that it's not, A, that it's not dry, but B, viewing it really as almost an induction. It's like, can the book kind of affect consciousness in a particular way? And I don't know if that'll work. But it's the only way I could kind of do it. So it's like there's chunks that are like, here's a way you might map this, but that might be immediately followed with a very long section that's completely nonlinear, that's actually trying to share the kind of felt sense of that experience, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, which is also why it's taking a really fucking long time, because it's like, okay, I have this down now in the this makes sense way, but that's not useful.
Hmm.
I actually need something that somebody reading it will get an actual feeling of it, not, I understand in your head. It's like I would rather have I have a little inkling of something in my body, is the goal in that part of it.
That makes a lot of sense. So I do want to ask more questions about that book in particular, but
Yeah, absolutely.
leading into that, you were describing the experience you had kind of healing with the aid of land spirits. So this experience with these land spirits, to you, that is part of what opened you up to being able to have this sort of more confident ability to notice really clear transmissions.
Yeah, because what happened was, I started walking every day because it was the only thing that could kind of like tone down my raging anxiety and kind of panic attacks that I was having. And I lived, I guess, about half a mile from the edge of a wood there. And so I mostly started just kind of roaming that wood. They call it the 100-acre wood after, the Winnie the Pooh zone, but it's a big chunk that you can run around in and get lost in. And I found a few kind of working shrine sites, forest shrines there, and started connecting to those a little bit. And if you walk all the way through that wood, and kind of pop out on this road that's kind of really the rural edge of Bellingham headed south, you hit this little pond. And at that pond, I was just wandering around it, and it was just gorgeous. And what happened one day was that I was walking along and I picked up a stone and was walking around the pond, and you get in the trees and you can't see the water anymore, and eventually I got to where it opened up and the water was right there, and I'm walking with this stone in my hand, kind of just like trying to process, as I did constantly. um and I was like, wait a second, I've written about how magic is like throwing stones in a lake, and how it generates all these ripples, and you can't, even at the point you can't see it anymore, they're still happening, right? And that part of kind of, in my mind, kind of the skill of magic is actually realizing that you can keep throwing stones in the water, but you have to let them all actually filter all the way out to see what that did, right?
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, so I asked them for help. I was just like, hey, I'm a fucking freak show right now. Uh, any help would be helpful, you know, and threw a stone in, and like it immediately felt like it was heard. Like there was no immediate result, but I was like, okay, this is a thing. And I couldn't practice at all at that point. I was like way too jacked up. And so I was like, this is my practice. And so I would walk up there every day and I would find one stone and walk around and kind of think about what it is I wanted to ask for help with. And mostly it was just the same one. It was just like, fucking help me. I'm losing it. I don't want to. um, and after probably a couple months of this, um, I started walking out of there with actually like actionable ideas. Um, and kind of that sense of my allies being close to me that I'd lost for a couple of years came back much stronger. And so now it was like me and the allies and the whatever that's going on at that pond. And then those shrines in the forest became much more active for me at that point. Um, and that's pretty much what I did for several years. That was kind of my practice for a few years for the most part. And part of that was I was also seeing a somatic therapist, not somatic experiencing specific, but somebody who's got a very intense body-based therapy practice, who was incredibly helpful to me. And I'd already decided when I went in, even before I went in there, like I wrote the most honest letter about kind of my state of mind being just fucking mangled, what I thought might be up, why I picked them based on what I could see online, that whole thing, and sent it in. And I walked in and she was like, you were like, that this about yourself means you're going to be fine, which I didn't know at that moment. She's like, but you've pegged a bunch of shit that nobody walks through here saying this is what's up that hasn't been in therapy before. And I think the second time she did kind of the bodywork component on me, I started getting these spasms that you and I probably have talked about at some point, or you've at least heard me talk about. I get these intense shoulder spasms. And that's always been a sign that my allies are present. That's how I read that. And it kicked up, and I was like, she already knew I was super woo. And I was like, okay, so just so you know, when that comes up, that's my allies are present. And she was like, super cool, and got to where like, she's like, allies are here, huh? And I'm like, yeah. She was fully legit and on board. And so that became, I kind of leaned into that. Like, I was like, okay, that's always accurate about their presence. Can we use it? Because I'm not good at mechanical divination. I can do some stuff with the pendulum, but that's about it. And so they showed up one night, and I was like, because I do most of this stuff in my bed. I don't do this at the altar. This is usually me in bed in the middle of the night. And kind of those shakes came on, and they can get really unpleasant because they can be really strong if they have a lot to say, or if they're being emphatic. And I was like, dudes, like, this kind of sucks. Like, I don't mind the shakes, but can we not have it be like where I think I might like chip a tooth or something? It's like, I'm okay that I appear, outsiders will think I'm having epileptic seizures when I'm talking to you, but can we not actually do damage? Because sometimes I would like wake up with like shoulder pain or neck pain from it. It was not chill. And they were like, oh, okay. And we'd like titrated it down over the next like half hour to a point like, yeah, I want it to be that obvious. I don't want it to be subtle because I'm fucking dense, but that's clear, and from there, and this is over a long period of time that this kind of shifted. We're now looking at kind of maybe 2 years after Changeling was when things started changing for me in this direction. So I've had a few years with it, but at some point I was like, can we do something different here? Can we do this as if this was the pendulum? So can this now be that you can let me know when you're around or you want to talk with these shakes, but could you also use this to tell me yes? So yes is shakes, and quieter shakes are less emphatic shakes, right? This is, again, how do you teach someone this? You can't. This is the way that this goes with me. So I don't pretend that I can teach this. And that got really fucking clear. And it got so clear that it's now conversational. Like, I can be talking out loud or thinking when this is going on, and they can steer me so radically that it is very much a conversation, even though I'm not hearing words from their side. And so practically, I've got this working altar up here to my allies and a couple of other spirits that are around. And so my entire practice has become pretty much, I give them, tasty treats, the ones they like. And we have these conversations. Um, and they will wake me up sometimes to have those conversations, which they've always done. But it was just vague, and it's not vague anymore. It's still not clear, which is the thing that I am always kind of talking to people about, that if you don't have this as a natural thing that is already coming through, I think it's a false teaching that you can make it clear in the way it is for somebody who's actually clairvoyant, or clairaudient. It's just not. I think it's neurological. I do think that the clairs are actually neurological at this point, and so I think that if you got it, you can probably tune it up, but you probably can't get it to the levels of the people that have got that stuff in spades. It's just not. That's an unreasonable thing to think. Like, I can train myself to run faster, but I'm never going to be fast. It's not in my makeup, you know?
Yeah. Speaking of Lee Morgan, their phrase, the noticing, I think is kind of key to that, because the noticing is noticing whatever it is that is signaling to you, be that a spasm, be that an idea, be that something in your second sight.
Yes.
So I like that, not trying to have an expectation of where communication would come from and being open.
Right. Yeah. And it can be, and it's a funny one. Like, I'm running this trance course right now, which I was super upfront about. And, I think that the people that didn't pay attention to that might be disappointed with it, because I know how to give you an experience. Like, I can talk you into a guided space that will cause you to have a particular experience, but I can't make that be real. Like, I can generate it in most people. And so the trance course is explicitly not trying to do that. It's like, I'm going to see if I can help you figure out, get you into spaces repeatedly. And that the inductions, instead of ooh, and now you meet your ally, is in the form of an animal. It's more like, can I get you to like break down your kind of belief of what sensory information is like in this space, and so it's tied into that. It's like, that to me is far more important than that I would talk you in and you get the, trash panda ally or something, because that may not be real. And I'm interested, for all that I sound like a nut job to someone who isn't in this world that we're in.
They're not listening.
They are listening, but I'm extremely interested in the reality of this stuff, in a way that precludes a lot of shit that one would normally do. No matter how weird it gets, I'm still like, is this legit? And I don't want to help people generate experiences that aren't that. So I would rather be honest and say, like, look, this took me many years, and I think this will help short form that for a lot of people. But I don't know that you're going to get anywhere like where you want to be during the course, right? Because there's neural changes that have to happen if this stuff doesn't happen naturally for you. And I think that that's what, again, I agree that that's kind of how my take on what Lee says about the noticing is, the information's there, and the allies, the spirits, however you want to talk about it, the dead are there, and they have different interests in different people for different things, and so there's no unified form in any kind of thing that kind of presents that there is. I am suspect of. And I look to indigenous cultures not for how do I do this, but for like sensibility about it. And that's something that I see in all of those cultures. Nobody says that the person that's pulling nasty spirits out of you is going to have the same experience as you with this. It's not a unified skill, right? It's not a unified talent. I don't see that in humans anywhere. I don't see that in animals anywhere. And so the big part is like, how do you, and really in our world, it's, you know, it's a funny thing to say as somebody who partially makes their living as an author. You gotta, at some point you gotta stop hunting information and go, what's actually happening? And can you really fucking lean into that? Uh, and that might take years, uh, because we're so disconnected in general. Again, if you're totally connected, if all this shit is easy, you can just ignore me. I had never had that experience. I don't know what that's like.
So I love that build in and the role of animism and this new avenue of communication for you. The second part of the tagline for the new book, and it's something you've talked about, but just for the people who maybe haven't heard some of your other conversations, what or who is the old line that you're referring to?
Okay, so I mentioned the old lines in 6 ways, and I think they're mentioned in the other 2 books, but I'm not sure. At some point before I wrote 6 ways, um, kind of sometime post 2012 maybe, but before 6 ways was published, um, I realized that, well, I didn't work with my close-in ancestors, for a number of reasons. I've had a sense of these way back ancestors. And so like the language I used to use, and it's more variable now, is like, you know, coming from somebody who's like European, I'm looking at kind of 5,000 years back and more. Like, I'm not looking, like, I consider everything post like 10,000 years ago as kind of the modern world. Um, and a lot of my connects are not even that, I don't think. I think that they're further back than that. And working with that idea, I realized that there appeared to be 2 groups that I worked with, at least. And so the old lines are any of these like old line ancestors you can think of as anybody that you couldn't identify where they lived, where they came from. Like, you might know they were European if you've done a DNA test or something, but there's no records of them.
Yeah.
You have no information about them, and none is forthcoming, essentially, through kind of material means. Um, and I realized that some of those appeared to be DNA ancestors.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is straight bloodline shit, right? And those are who I've called either the bloodline or the elder line. But there was something else going on for me, um, that didn't make sense, because I knew what my bloodline was. And I had some ancestor spirits or spirits of the dead who were really active and who were really interested in magic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's not as many of them, but they're very prevalent. Um, and some of this came about that the first time I like kind of had like a serious connect to those ancestral currents. And I've shared this in a couple of other places, but my friend Bree Saucy was doing like a Halloween Samhain kind of guided meditation thing through like a call-in thing. I don't think it was even Zoom. I think it was pre-Zoom. Uh, uh, and I did this when I was in Tennessee, so probably like 2013 maybe. And so she guides us in, and we go to this kind of lovely summerland, kind of green fields, land of the dead. And all of my dads, many of whom are, you know, recognizable, the ones that are closer in, my grandparents and stuff, are like moving in, and I'm having this like idyllic experience of being welcomed by my kin from the other side, which lasts for about 30 seconds. And then they like get hazy and they part. and this super not hazy dude who comes in as like really old European looking, not high class, not fancy clothes or anything, with like kind of shoulder length gray hair and really intense fucking eyes, like walks through the crowd of them as they're like parting away and is like talking shit essentially um about what I'm doing in my head about like, oh good, I get the, I'm having this like thing, and he's like, no, that is not for you. We have been trying to talk to you for so fucking long, essentially. Not, this is not probably actually in words. This is how I interpreted it, because we have shit to do. And I knew he was correct. It was just like that thing. It's like that straight spirit, like, oh yeah, got it. And he grabbed me by the back of my head with both hands and like pulled my head to his forehead and just kind of like radiated into me for a while. And I came out of that and was like, that's the spirit line. Like, this guy's not family, but this guy's like connected to what I actually do that matters in the world. Because to me, magic is what I do is the most important aspect of my life this time around. And I began kind of talking to them as well, just kind of like, hey, I know you're out there. Like, that was pretty clear. What are we doing? And they were fairly quiet, but it's like I could feel them in the background, right? And so I began making offerings to the old line dead and to the spirit line, what I now call the mist line. Just because technically they're all spirits, so it makes sense to have a language that can be used. And over time, what kind of became clearer to me is like the elder line, the bloodline, it's really interested in how I'm doing materially. Like, they're who I go to if I need help in the material. Because they get it. Like, even though the version of the material world that I live in is totally different from theirs, they understand shelter, people, food, right? The mist line kind of doesn't care. They're kind of like, there's shit to do. You have a body. Get on with it. We don't have bodies anymore, and we have shit to do. And over the years, I've just come to be very comfortable with them. And that what I had kind of thought was maybe I drew them to me through what I do. I kind of think it went the other way. Like, I think that's kind of, I have some raw connect to something. And like, I think we talked about my Man in Black experience before when I was 11. Like, that may have been the first time they came through. Like, that may be really what that initiation was about, was like, like, wake up, boy. You're not doing suburban life anymore. Even if you have to, you're doing something else as well, and so that's kind of who they are. Yeah, so
That's great. Yeah, you answered like a bunch of my questions in your response, so thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, bringing in the mist line though, because one of my questions was going to be, how do you think the mist line comes to us? And you go into it there, which I really appreciate. I'm curious, I suppose, how human do you think the mist line is or was, or do you not know?
I have some theories. So, and this kind of goes into the book, and just for people that don't know, like, all of this is directly related to stones that are hanging out on the table. Chad has probably been around me playing with the stones before, so if I get overly involved with things on the table, it's because we're chatting. Initially, when the mist line, okay, order of things. So I'll give you kind of the background on how the book came about because it's relevant in here. So one day I'm in the forest beyond that pond and I'm walking and I start seeing stones, and I'm kind of obsessed with stones and magic. It's my main kind of magical tool, or just stones that I find out in the woods. And I pick one up because it's really cool. And like the what I call the peeps, which are kind of allies plus kind of all the spirits around me, are like, no. And I'm like, okay. And I drop it. And a little ways further down the road, I find another one and I pick it up. And they're like, no, not that one. And this happens like 4 or 5 times. And I like stop in the middle of the road. I talk to myself all the time anyway. So I'm on this trail out in the woods. So I'm just like, what the fuck? Like, you keep pointing out stones to me. We're doing a stone thing, but I cannot find the right stone. Like, what the fuck? Because usually this isn't hard. Uh, and they were like super clear. And they said, wait till you get to the creek. And I'm like, okay. And so another mile or so on through the woods, I come down to the creek and head down to where there's kind of like a, like a rocky bank there, and head down there. And and I start picking up stones, and they're like, no, they have to all be really different. Like, you have to be able to tell them apart, eyes closed, eyes open, totally different. I'm like, okay. And so I end up out of there with 5 stones that are all very different. And so I'm like, well, this is still when I'm at the creek. I'm like, so what are we doing with this? And they're like, we'll tell you in a bit. And so I'm kind of assuming I'm going to get waken up at night and let's talk about the stones. So I'm like, okay, cool. I know how this rolls. They will wake me up at 3 in the morning and we'll do the thing. And I get 20 minutes further down the path, kind of right before I would head off into the neighborhoods to get to my house. And they're just like, boom. And, if it were a movie, and it's nothing like the movies, it would be like the Neo thing of like, I know Kung Fu, right? From the Matrix. Except it's nothing like that. Instead, it's like, what did you just put in my fucking head? Like, I don't understand this at all, but I now have this completely expanded thing that's trying to unpack. And so again, this is more useful for people that are playing with this. It was completely unclear. It was like, I knew a bunch of shit, but I didn't have access to it. It was weird. And this is not uncommon, but it was a particularly weird one. And so I went home and began working with the stones. And the first thing that came out was that 2 of them were for the old lines. One was for the elder line and one was for the mist line. And I thought that the kind of odd bird out was for this other part of the mist line, that the mist line was, as I was first perceiving it really clearly in this new kind of way that came through, I was like, oh, there's people here, but there's also non-people here. Right. So this is kind of going to your question, is are all humans? And I have a friend that is kind of always the first person to know about this. She helps edit my books. And so we chat about this stuff more before it goes public than anybody else. And she was like, could you send me some information on the stones? And so I sent her the information on the 5 stones with the suggestion that the mist line appeared to be split and that there were 2 stones there. And over the course of about the next 2 weeks, I discovered that this was not the case, and it was actually really unpleasant if you tried to do that. Like, this is not good. This is a bad idea. And so we got on the phone, And I was like, how's that going for you? And she's like, that fucking second misline, that's wrong. I'm like,
Hmm.
okay, cool. So she got it too, you know? And so what it seems to be and what they have told me is that, and this is in my case, and this is going to be different for everybody, I think. Um, and we can talk about that in a second too. But if you remind me about kind of misline and magical people, because of what I'm connected to, the misline comes in as kind of these practitioners and their allied spirits.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I'd originally kind of viewed the allied spirits as a separate kind of thing. And it's a really fucking bad idea
Hmm.
because you don't have the agreements that these people have with those spirits.
Hmm.
And the spirits are kind of fuck you. And
Mm-hmm.
the human spirits are kind of like, don't fucking fuck with my spirits.
Hmm.
It's interesting. It's not very lovey-dovey over there for me. Which the kind of elders are very sweet. The mist line's kind of like they're business oriented. Um, and so yeah, there is this secondary spirit component in there, but at least for me, it's all these kind of allies and familiar spirits of the kind of human aspects that are coming through. There don't It doesn't appear that the mist line is fully separate. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I now think, and we may have talked about this last time, like my experience with the sisters in the other world, like I think that those were connected to someone in my mist line
Hmm.
and that they were kind of
Interesting.
sent to me at a point when I needed them. Um, and so, whereas like the brothers who kind of the Feverstone practice came from, in Weaving Fate, I've been kind of repeatedly told like, yeah, that's straight up ancestors.
Hmm.
Those are your elder line folks. Like they're totally attached to you. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Trying to remind you what you just commented on about how this might be different for other people.
Mm.
What were you thinking that when you said that?
So my initial thought was because there was this clear kind of practitioner and familiars aspect, I was like, I wonder if this is like really limited because it was kind of a weird thing to be writing about. Because I'm like, because this is then a suggestion in a sense that this doesn't, not everybody would have this.
Mhm.
And I don't really think that that's accurate. Now, kind of more time in, I think that your mist line is going to be whatever kind of your kind of core calling is.
Mhm.
So if you practice magic, but your main thing is art,
Mm.
or
Mhm.
you're a doctor, I think it's more likely that that mist line influence is going to manifest through whatever that core thing is, rather than it be um, this is a thing that some witches get, you know,
Mhm.
because that doesn't super make sense to me. I could be wrong, and I'll be interested to see kind of as people play with the material in the book to see what they find out.
Yeah.
Um, but they see, you know, again, they're so kind of like they've got an agenda, mind you, and that is all they care about. And it is very much you have the body, you have the skills, we'll back you up, but there's shit we want to see done. Um, and I happen to agree with all of it, so it works. Um, but like, yeah, if I were to say like, it's kind of funny. Like they are the people that I could probably go to and say, could we double my income?
Mm.
And if they thought that would help the project, they would do that. Whereas if I
Mhm.
go to my ancestors for that, like, dude, you have like roof, shelter, running water. What the fuck is your problem?
Hmm. Interesting.
Like my ancestors are like very pragmatic.
Mhm.
I think that it's, you know, long lines of like hunter gatherers, farmers, all that shit. It's like you have shelter, you have food, you have water, you have
Mhm.
clothing. You don't
Interesting.
even get cold at night. What the fuck is your problem? Why do you need more money?
Mm-hmm.
But I think I could go to the other side and go, hey, if I had this, there's ways we could further this project.
Mm-hmm.
They might, if they agreed, they would kind of go for that. But if I was full of shit and then decided I just needed to buy a bunch of guitars or something, they would probably slap my ass really hard because they're like, no, we have shit to do and you're the one that's doing it. Which, is also something to think about for folks who might go, ooh, I wish I had that. It's like, it's not necessarily going to be easy because it's not what you want.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, focusing on the elder line. So these are presumably ancestors from your bloodline, in theory, anyways. I'm curious, a thing you talk about a lot and a thing that's influenced my thinking a lot is, this observation of the impulsive empire that has such a large presence in our world and has for a very long time. I'm just curious, when you go back to the old lines, do you get a sense that that presence is dulled? Do you think it's always there and it's a countercultural movement that is against empire? Yeah, does that come up for you at all when you're looking into the old lines?
It does. And again, it's an interesting one because it's like, in my experience, kind of if we're running on kind of a spirit-based, which is very different than a spirit model, but a spirit-based practice, like almost everything becomes chicken and egg questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, is this a thing I'm into because of that? Or is this a thing that is attracted to me because I'm into it,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's very, and I don't even think it makes any sense to try and sort that. I did try to sort that for a long time. I have always had a major anarchist streak.
Mm-hmm.
I don't trust power as far as kind of social power and money power. Um, and is that something that kind of I came in with because of who some of my crew are? I don't know. And I tend to think so because that's not something that I can recall learning. It's something that's pretty, like, it's not like I did have trust for that and then was disillusioned or learned how the world worked. Because I know a lot of people that that's their experience, and that's not been mine. Um, what I see in there is that they have a lot of knowledge about how this played out a long time ago. And they are very fucking upset about how it is playing out now. Like they see it really as radically, radically different. And if that's kind of, mass population increases, all of that stuff, they're hugely appalled with what we do to the world. Like they're almost like, it's not like they're cool with what we do to each other because they're not.
Mm-hmm.
But like the serious disconnect for them that I pick up on is they're like, these things are interrelated, and yet and there's essentially the same thing that I've talked about quite a bit that you're kind of hinting at, which is that um, this is a pathology
Mm-hmm.
that has always existed, but it never had the kind of power that it does in the Anthropocene and in the modern world, particularly.
So this is a little technical when it comes to ancestral work, but how bureaucratic do you think the process is of one individual ancestor having an effect on our lives? Do you think there's an element of competition or seniority involved with how they can have our ear, have influence on us?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I don't know that it could be, and we're chatting for people that don't know, stone in hand, talking to old Klein. It's like they're saying it's not like a bureaucratic thing, it's that it's a power thing. And so a lot of the work that we're doing now, this is going to go probably way off tangent, that's okay, but is dealing with the idea that animism is kind of normative human consciousness, and that it's actually the way the world works, that it's not a
Mhm.
model, that it's not a
Mhm.
theoretical model, it's not a belief, in the sense that it's not faith-based. It's not like looking at it going, this is a good story, but this is actually how things are. That we live in a world that is essentially continuously manifesting spirit, um, and that this is that a huge portion of that spirit is essentially agentic and somewhat sovereign. It's doing its own things, right? Um, and the part of the kind of power of animism to kind of, as a healing thing for us individually and potentially on a societal level, which is what we're interested in, is that it essentially denies the reality of all of this, what I call empire, mythology, which is patriarchy, capitalism, um, misogyny, all of these things, which are essentially ways of looking at what we mean by empire is the pathological impulse to take what you need regardless of its effects on others, um, and that it's an innately corrupting influence, and that if you give into it, what may have at first seemed like a trade-off that was worth making becomes the driving impulse behind it. So empire is directly related to physical, emotional, and sexual abuse, which one might do initially because you want something that someone else has, and you believe that your wanting of it is equivalent with your right and your power to take it, but that will eventually turn and become kind of the actual pathology of that impulse, is that becomes its own reward system. And so when I'm talking about empire and when we're talking about empire, um, abuse is often viewed as kind of like a side effect of patriarchy or a side effect of capitalism. And we would posit that actually it's the intention behind it.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
that may have been the root kind of
Mhm.
first action. I
Mhm.
want that. And you convince yourself it's okay to take it. But as it becomes pathological, it's now you realize that that abuse and that ability to inflict trauma uh, intentionally, whether that's, which does not necessarily mean fully consciously, um, is the goal. And this is part of the issue with us now is there's so much false equivalency saying that we could educate somebody out of that, right?
Mhm.
But if the pathology is really fully in there, it's not that they don't know what they're doing. They know exactly what they're doing, and it's feeding that beast.
Mhm.
So it's not a thing that can be educated out of them, right? Um, and so if we look at that, I would say most of us um, have ancestral kind of sections or individuals or particular, this is often so generational that you might have many, many generations that are kind of riding within that, most commonly sexual and physical abuse, probably, but lots of emotional abuse as well. those, we could view those as just to label them. We could label that as like a particular chunk of ancestral power rather than necessarily trying to fixate it on an individual. Because again, it's usually generational. That can have hugely outsized power on us. Like it can totally trump tons of other shit. And so, yes, you can have individual ancestors, and this is usually the close-in ones. And you can look at this pragmatically, and this is maybe if that seems really abstract to people, it's like, I talk about it a lot because I think it's just important to share. Not for me, but for people to like understand that you can share it and it'd be okay. One of my great grandfathers was a serial child molester, essentially. And so we could say that that guy is the issue, but something happened that we don't know about to him that set that up. We know that commonly this might be that he also experienced this, right? It could be everything all the way down to like running into some really fucking nasty spirits somewhere, right? This also happens. And having no skills to manage that. There's downstream effects all the way through my generation, even though this is like a pretty fucking big span of period of time. And some of those people never had any contact with that guy. But right, his sons and daughters were shaped by this, and that shaped their own relationships with their partners, with their children, which then continues to shape. So I could see down my father's line that influence, even though it wasn't perpetuated beyond that generation. Like that didn't stop the influence, right? So we can look at that and go, that's kind of a physical explanation of that. And again, coming from an animistic viewpoint, you go, that's like a spirit in itself. It's like it's generated a spirit form that is kind of attached to the bloodline. And it can also, of course, spread out because maybe that makes me super touchy and super violent. And so this can now spread out beyond the bloodline, right? Doesn't have to stay within it. And so a lot of ancestral work that I think is making sense, or that makes sense to me, is being comfortable to the degree you can be comfortable with such things, because it's not comfortable. But being willing to kind of go, okay, my ancestors were involved in the genocide of Native Americans. This is speaking for myself. I do not know if they were involved in the slave trade, but some of them probably had slaves. All of this filters down to me, and most of that doesn't go away completely until someone gets involved. And so it becomes kind of, to me, our task is not that we can't necessarily, you can't free someone from what they did. And so it's not a question of forgiving them in that sense, but there are things that you can do as a practitioner where you can begin to untangle those knots. And, that's kind of the fever stone practice, is the one that's tied in. And that's the fifth stone also from the stones that they gave me, is they were like, you have to like teach the fever stone again, for anybody that missed it, in Weaving Fate, and in a different context, because it's so fucking important. And it's why it's the thing I teach the most, other than the reclaiming right, and so I think it's important. Yeah, you can definitely have, a lot of people will have, if you're non-binary, if you're queer, if you are in an interracial marriage or relationship, if you are like super fucking neurodivergent and not really able to get by in the way that some of your more recent ancestors might think you should, there can be a lot of ancestral pressure to just kind of like suck it up and take it, because we did, right? Or because we don't like that you're queer. This comes through your ancestors. And it's, it's not fun and it's not pretty, and you don't have to work with them in the sense of, you don't have to do ancestor veneration with, the horrible people in your ancestry, but there are things that are distinct from that can nonetheless kind of help loosen those ties. And so certainly certain pieces will have really outsized effects, or we can look at families that maybe were like that, but you had that one character that kind of overpowered all of it in a positive direction, right? And that person kind of begins that process of remediating that damage. And, hopefully we become that person, whether we have kids or not, but that's what we begin to bring from that out into the world.
That's a great answer. I have a couple questions I'd like to ask you about in Patreon, but I have one more just to tack on to this conversation about animism and ancestors, and also bringing in multiple levels of the practices you put out there. A question that's been in my mind lately, just something I've been kind of playing around with, is what can sometimes feel difficult to parse, this notion of animism, which is this kind of collective spirit ecology we exist in, and also this concept of idealism that comes up so much in magic. This manifestation kind of aspect to a lot of magical practices that can sometimes lead you to like a solipsistic view, potentially, of reality. So you have your black book, which is essentially a practice of manifestation to a certain degree. And I'm just curious how you see aspects of idealism and animism working together philosophically for you.
Yeah. Now, can you give me a definition of idealism? Because it's not a term that I
Yeah,
work
yeah,
with.
yeah.
So.
Sorry, yeah. So essentially, idealism is kind of the view that to some degree, potentially, we create reality around us as an individual. How the extent of that is up for debate, and people can have different ideas about that. But some people would see that as an aspect of how magic works. And even making synchronicities occur potentially is, a thing we are kind of self-generating by our interests. I'm not saying any of this is a fact. I'm just saying,
no,
like,
it's
that kind of philosophy,
Yeah. So getting that I don't really know that's not a place that I play.
Yeah.
I would say that okay. The Peep Radio is on.
Good.
How I've been talking about this is pretty straightforward, and the book kind of goes into this. We'll be going into this too. Is because I actually really do think that we are in an animist universe. I think that is just real.
Okay.
And I think that this has been known in every culture up until a point where there's a break.
Mm-hmm.
And this has happened at different times in different places and to different degrees, right? I kind of think that view that we are the center of this, making stuff happen, is hilarious.
Okay.
And this is not where I started either. But I did start knowing spirits were real, which put me in a different boat from a lot of people. I've never viewed that it's a spirit model. Like that's never been it. It is very clear that where we put our attention and our intentions influences our experience. I don't think that that's arguable. But I believe most of these kind of explanations for how the world works, and I keep making air quotes for anybody that's just listening to us, so you can kind of guess where they were. The way I've been describing them is like, if animism is the reality that we are in as humans, I'm not saying this is necessarily ultimate reality, but as humans, as animals on this planet, this is what we're in. One way to view spiritual systems and magical systems and philosophies is very much like that animism is the underlying code. And I do not mean this anything like literally. We're not talking it's a computer or it's an information-based system, because I don't go there. But that all of these systems can be viewed as like graphical user interfaces, which are intentionally meant to obscure the code to make it easier to handle the thing that you're looking at or the thing you're trying to do, right? So it's easier to format a book in Pages on the Mac or in Word than it is to try and do that at a line level, though you could, because that's happening somewhere, right? Within there. And so I look at religions, magical traditions, all of these things, and this is not inherently a negative thing, as ways that different people, different cultures have attempted to narrow the scope of what they're dealing with to make it more palatable and easier to use. And that language is kind of prescriptive, which is the easier to use, in the negative connotation of use. And so any system that gives you the distance to not take full responsibility for your actions now and further downstream, I believe is a bad one. And I believe most of our kind of modern systems of thinking about these things that we would throw out as being in the West or whatever, which is again another quote, are this. It's like if you look at a system and it says, what does this allow me to do? That if I believed that I was entirely a sovereign and agentic causal being with total responsibility for all of the effects of my actions, which does not mean I can control them, these outcomes, but it means that if you throw that rock in the water, you threw that rock in the water, period. There, you can't get around it. And this is, to me, what animism brings to this whole thing, is it's saying you can't escape responsibility for your actions. You can't escape responsibility for your choices. You are not responsible for what your ancestors did, but as the person in the body, which is kind of a recurring theme we've had here with what I get from my people, you are the only one that can do anything about it now. Right? You didn't do it. It's not your responsibility in that sense. Right? You're not responsible. I'm not responsible for the fact that there was this child molester in my line. But it is my responsibility to do all the healing that I can around that, so that I'm not carrying whatever traces of that still hang out in me through my trauma due to having, a largely emotionally absent father, that there's work I had to do there, simply because I'm the only one who could. I mean, he's gone. He can't do anything about it. And so coming again from kind of this animist spirit view and belief that the dead are present with us, that we are the dead walking, to kind of paraphrase Lee, it doesn't matter that you don't want it to be on you. If you know these things are on you, you're the only one that can do anything about it. Now, can you manifest in crazy ways? Yes, because that's also how the system works. You are also a causal and agentic being. But I do believe you'll have far better success in having a really good life if you also realize that we are not the crown of creation. That this is an absolute myth. And many people have said it before, but the easiest way, if you think humans are the most perfect, most important thing in the world, what happens if we're all gone? essentially everything gets better. It's not saying we're parasites, which is another thing that people do, but we have moved into a particular zone that's really not good. And there's really not a landscape, other than things like the nuclear reactors that melt down, but that'll pass. Wherein if you pull the humans out, the landscape is in worse condition. You remove us and our buildings, biodiversity goes up. So how can that be true if we are the only thing that matters, or we are the most important thing? And so I think animism is super helpful because it helps us decenter ourselves and to place us within the ecology and not say I'm the center of the ecology. And that idea of kind of the responsibility that this brings to the table is the thing that essentially that kind of pathology of empire has tried to split us off from. Because it wants to say, A, you're either powerless or you're powerful in a way that makes you complicit with things that you know are wrong and will give you a justification, rationalization set to allow you to live with that because it binds you into that particular spirit ecology, the spirit ecology of that pathology. And this is what I think we've really lost in the West is a kind of tool sets to heal that stuff so that we don't feel like when we opt out or we discover we cannot successfully be complicit in these systems, that we aren't treating that as a failure. And that we go, okay, maybe I don't get all the things that I'm told that I want, or maybe I do alienate a ton of fucking people. And I have to figure out a different way to fill those holes. It sets you up to actually have an idea of how to begin to do that. Then you go, okay, what is functioning in my ecology? Right. And it's also why kind of the social media age is so gnarly. And I mean that in the widest sense, is that the internet has been awesome because you and I can have this talk and we can get it out to people, but it's also made it so much easier to put forward kind of all of these ideas that these material gains or this particular kind of popularity or this particular kind of success or not really aging or maybe never dying is reachable and desirable. And if we're viewing this kind of empire, colonialism, patriarchy, capitalism as kind of a pathology, you realize that all of these things can be viewed as actually kind of setting you up to think that they're inevitable. And you see this in the arguments around this a lot, like, oh yeah, we could feed everybody if we, took all of the money from the billionaires and just left them with, $1 billion each. But we can't do that because all of the becauses are not real. Yes, we actually can do that. It's happened before. It will happen again, to quote the Cylons, and so, yeah, I mean, that's where I go with that. So I think it's important. So things like the Black Book are super helpful, but they're helpful in a way that is peculiar, I think. Like the people that I like really can kind of find thriving in Black Book land are the ones who are like, I'm getting really interesting results here. Like I'm learning what I really want. I'm learning what is important for me through this practice of trying to manifest stuff. I'm learning where I'm really fucked up around some shit. And that's kind of like the secret backside of the Black Book is it's like, it will help you get your life. Like I am 100% living a Black Book in a way that I started in 2015. And ended by like 2016 or 17. And it's clear. Now, the specific points are not the same. Like, it's not the life that I wrote about on the surface, but all of the underlying kind of my kind of psychic health, my ability to like be around people that I care about, all of that has come into play. And I believe it's directly linked to that. And a big part of that is it weeded out so much shit. Like I love the fact that I spent, 6 months writing these kind of fantasy worlds about some things and kind of walked out the other end and went like, nah. Like that's all the shit that has come to me from my upbringing in this particular culture. That's not what I'm looking for. And then you start again and you go, okay, so if that's not what you want, what do you want?
That is an excellent answer. Thank you so much. Before I send you over to ask some Patreon questions, what plugs do you have for the good folks out there?
Not much. I'm almost entirely just on Patreon these days. I'll be teaching in February on the old lines and related things at Between the Worlds in College Park, Maryland. For folks that are on that end of the world, that looks to be a good time. I have never done anything like that indoors, so we're going to see how that goes.
Yeah, you're doing 3 presentations. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's wild. I'm still kind of shocked that they invited me. So,
hell yeah! Well, thank you so much for taking the time. Really appreciate your very open and honest answers.
And thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Okay, we are now magically in a new podcast for Patreon members only. Welcome again. So yeah, speaking of your conference coming up in February, Between the Worlds, I couldn't help but notice one of your presentations is on a subject that you've kind of tiptoed around for a while. And I've already preemptively given you permission to be as vague as you want or to say no answer whenever you feel like it. I have lots of questions not related to this, but I'm going to front end with my questions about it because I'm just very curious. So the presentation in question is on a spirit ecology that you are calling the Feral Queens. Very evocative, very interesting title. Something I kind of resonate with on a personal level based on just my own experiences. And you have, like I said, permission to be as vague as you want, but how would you describe your understanding of this spirit ecology?
Okay, so this is where this gets weird. This is why it says it gets a little weird in the right up there. It would be most useful for people listening to this to consider that this is probably not the me that you are usually used to hearing speak. My aversion to channeling eventually became me channeling. And so there's that to start with. I think it's probably best that I could give you the backstory.
Sure.
And that's probably kind of as far as we can kind of go.